Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so glad you're joining us for this deep dive. You know, when we think about a buried landmine, there's this terrifying reality to it. You bury it in the dirt, and then the spring rains come.
Right, the grass just grows right over the disturbed soil.
Yeah, and after a decade or two, it just looks like a peaceful meadow. The surface is completely calm.
The birds are singing, the sun is out.
Right. You might even forget it is there. I mean, people might even build a house right next to it, completely oblivious to what is resting a few feet below the surface.
Because the danger is totally hidden from sight. I mean, the landscape appears normal, and life just carries on as if nothing is wrong. The human mind is incredibly adept at normalizing dangerous situations, if enough time passes.
It really is. But the explosive is still there, waiting. It does not dissolve. It does not lose its destructive capability with the passing of time. All it needs is the right amount of pressure, and that calm surface violently shatters.
Yeah, it just takes one step.
Exactly. Wait, spot on. Today, we are looking at a story about that kind of hidden pressure. We are examining an intense family report found in the book of Genesis, chapter 42, verses 29 through 34. Set the scene in your mind. The brothers of Joseph have just returned from Egypt to the land of Canaan.
They have grain in their sacks to survive a global famine, but they have absolute terror in their hearts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
After 22 years of hiding a dark, blood-soaked family secret, their past has finally caught up with them. We are looking at the inescapable reality of God's providence and how it operates in the shadows of human guilt. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the physical crisis that triggered this entire situation.
The catalyst for everything.
Yeah, the brothers are terrified right now, but the only reason they left their homes in the first place was a literal physical catastrophe. We were talking about a massive ecological crisis.
The physical crisis is the driving mechanism of the narrative. To grasp the weight of this, we need to situate ourselves in the historical setting of the patriarchal dispensation. Now, that might sound like a heavy theological term, but it simply means we are looking at a specific era in biblical history. During this era, the covenant family is not a mighty nation with a standing army.
They do not have a capital city or fortified walls.
Right, they are a vulnerable, nomadic household clan living in tents in Canaan. They are highly susceptible to the elements, and they are facing off against the unmatched supreme superpower of the ancient world. They are facing ancient Egypt.
Let me stop you there for a second to make sure I am getting this.
Yeah.
When you say vulnerable nomadic household, you mean these guys do not have a safety net?
No, not at all.
They are not the kingdom of Israel we read about later with King David in massive stone cities. They are essentially shepherds trying to survive on the whims of the weather.
Spot on. They are living on the edge of survival even in good years. The ancient Near East saw localized droughts frequently, but the famine described here is of an unprecedented global scale.
Yeah.
And the historical and theological analyses we are looking at make it abundantly clear that this is not a random climate event. This famine is a sovereign decree by God.
So it is intentional.
Yes, it acts as an instrument of spiritual surgery. God uses this massive agricultural collapse to force Jacob's sons out of their insular, comfortable existence in Canaan and push them into an encounter that will break them.
Wait, let me push back on that a bit. You are saying God caused a global famine, meaning entire nations are starving, just to teach a dozen guys a lesson.
I know,
That sounds incredibly harsh to the modern ear. How is that justified?
That is the natural reaction most of us have. It feels disproportionate. But this is where the theological framework provided by the Westminster Confession, specifically Chapter 5, becomes so crucial.
Right, the chapter on Providence.
Yes. It states that God, the great creator, upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures' actions and things, from the greatest even to the least. God ordains a massive global event specifically to awaken the deadened consciences of a few guilty men.
That is just wild to think about.
It is. Think about the geographical tension here. Canaan is the promised land. It is the land tied to the covenant oath God made with Abraham. But at this specific moment, it is barren. It cannot sustain the chosen family.
While Egypt is the exact opposite.
Exactly. Well, yes. Egypt is the foreign, intimidating empire filled with idolatry, but it holds the grain. The tension is that God is not confined to visible covenant geography. He is willing to use Egypt's storehouses to preserve the family of promise.
So he is directing the geopolitical movements of the greatest empire on earth to discipline, purify, and save a single household.
Is.
That is staggering. I think of it like a massive global supply chain collapse. Imagine a person who has committed a terrible crime and has been hiding out in a remote, comfortable cabin off the grid for decades.
Right, they feel totally secure.
Yeah, they feel completely safe. The grass has grown over their landmine. But then a total collapse of the global supply chain happens. The local stores run dry. The well dries up.
They cannot just stay in the cabin anymore.
No. The only way this person can get food and survive is to walk out of their hiding place, cross a highly militarized border, and stand inside an intimidating, high-security government facility where they have to state their name and background.
The circumstances literally force them out of the shadows.
Yeah, that is what is happening to Jacob's sons. The global crisis forces the brothers across a heavily guarded border, bringing us directly to their terrifying encounter with a foreign ruler.
Which is their own brother, though they do not know it.
Right. Because the famine pushed them into Egypt, they now have to return to Canaan and report back to their father, Jacob, about the terrifying man they met. Let us look at the text of their report in Genesis 42, verses 29 and 30.
Yeah, it is very telling.
They tell Jacob, "The man who is the Lord of the land spoke roughly to us." They are completely consumed by the severity of this individual.
Yeah.
They do not talk about the massive architecture of the Egyptian cities.
Or the sheer volume of grain available.
Right. All they can talk about is the crushing authority of this ruler.
The language they use is highly revealing. The specific Hebrew phrasing here is dibber itanu quashat, which translates to spoke roughly.
Spoke roughly.
But that English translation barely scratches the surface. It means hard, severe, fierce, or even cruel speech.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in the context of the ancient Near East, particularly in suzerain vassal treaties, this type of language denotes the absolute unyielding severity of a conquering king addressing subjugated peoples.
I have to pause you again. Suzerain vassal treaties. That is another one of those terms that sounds like it belongs in a graduate seminar.
True.
Break that down for someone who is just trying to understand how this conversation in Egypt actually sounded.
Okay, think of a suzerain as an absolute emperor and a vassal as a defeated subordinate king who has to pay tribute.
Okay, got it.
When the emperor speaks to the vassal, there is no polite small talk. There is no negotiation. It is pure, unfiltered authority dictating terms. Joseph is adopting the strict legal posture of an absolute, unapproachable monarch.
Wow, so he is not pulling any punches.
Not at all. And the accusation he levels at them, that they are spies or merglem in Hebrew, is not a casual insult. In an era where Egypt was highly protective of its eastern frontier against Asiatic incursions, an accusation of espionage was a culturally plausible capital offense.
Oh, so they could have been killed right there.
Easily. It carried the penalty of immediate execution or perpetual enslavement.
So Joseph is not simply being impolite or having a bad day at the office. He is wielding the full lethal authority of the Egyptian state against them. He is deliberately putting them in a position of absolute helplessness.
He is cornering them.
And this has a massive theological implication. The analysis points out that God uses severe authority to awaken guilty consciences. When you look at your own life, you have to consider how God might use intimidating, harsh circumstances, what the sources often call severe mercies, to strip away our pride.
That is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It is. Sometimes God does not use a gentle whisper. He uses the crushing weight of circumstances we cannot control to corner us and force us to deal with reality.
That concept of severe mercies is vital for you to understand. We often want a deity who exists to facilitate our comfort, a God who always speaks softly and affirms our self-esteem.
Right, a very therapeutic view of God.
Yeah, but the God of Scripture will speak roughly to us through his law and through circumstances to shatter our arrogant pride. Joseph's severity is a governed severity. It is not petty revenge.
Right, he's not just being vindictive.
No, he is testing them to see if their character has changed since they sold him into slavery 22 years prior. God brings these men to a point where their false sense of security is obliterated by a demand they cannot negotiate their way out of.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially when we look at how the brothers react to this crushing pressure. Faced with this terrifying accusation of espionage, the brothers instinctively scramble to defend themselves.
Which is just a natural human reaction.
Of course. What do you do when a high-ranking official accuses you of a capital offense? You panic, you put your hands up, you try to clear your name immediately.
You say whatever you have to say to get out of trouble.
Yeah, and this leads to a massive display of irony. We see this defense in verse 31. They report to Jacob that they told the Egyptian ruler, "We are true men, we are no spies." They are desperately asserting their integrity.
What's fascinating here is the psychology of partial truth. The Hebrew word they use for true men or honest men is konim.
Konim.
Yeah. It translates to being right, just, or utterly reliable. Now, factually speaking, concerning the charge of political espionage, they are telling the truth.
Right, they're just there to buy food.
Yes. They are not military scouts looking for weaknesses in Egypt's border defenses. But morally speaking, calling themselves honest men is a spectacular, breathtaking lie.
It really is.
These are the men who threw their own teenage brother into a pit, ignored his cries for mercy, sold him to Midianite traders for 20 pieces of silver, and then brought a blood-soaked coat back to their father to cover up their crime.
It is the ultimate form of self-delusion. Think about this analogy. Imagine you have just successfully robbed a massive bank vault.
Okay, I am picturing it.
The stolen cash is stuffed into the trunk of your car. As you are driving away, sweating bullets and checking your rearview mirror, a police officer pulls you over for a broken taillight.
Oh, that would be terrifying.
Yeah. The officer walks up to the window and asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And you get entirely offended. You cross your arms and say, "Listen, I am an excellent driver. I am a good citizen. I have never had a speeding ticket in my life."
Right, you focus on the minor thing to deflect from the major thing.
Exactly. You are pleading absolute innocence to a minor traffic charge while actively concealing a massive felony in your trunk. You might be innocent of the immediate charge of being a bad driver, but you are completely guilty before the judge for the bank robbery.
That is such a good way to look at it.
The brothers are clinging to this tiny microscopic sliver of factual innocence, we are no spies, while ignoring the massive moral felony of their past.
That is a brilliant illustration of how the fallen human heart operates. The text acts as a mirror, exposing our instinct to retreat into self-righteousness when confronted by the law or the threat of judgment.
We all do it.
We really do. This passage completely rejects modern liberal moralism and therapeutic concepts that tell people they are inherently good. When cornered, we are incredibly skilled at narrowing the charge until we can plead innocent.
We say, "I am an honest person," while selectively ignoring our pride, our harsh words, our bitterness, or our hidden actions.
Yeah. The text shows that God is not satisfied with technical innocence regarding one specific charge. He demands absolute truth in the inward parts. He addresses the whole person.
He wants the trunk opened.
He absolutely wants the trunk opened. And their verbal defense completely fails to convince the Egyptian lord. He does not take their word for it.
Why would he? He knows exactly who they are.
Right. Since their words are untrustworthy, the ruler sets a non-negotiable condition that strikes at the very heart of the family's dysfunction. He demands physical, agonizing proof of their integrity.
Which brings us to the specific conditions laid out in verses 33 and 34. Simeon is taken and held hostage in an Egyptian dungeon.
Grain is provided so their starving households in Canaan will not die.
But the crushing blow is the final condition. Their youngest brother, Benjamin, must be brought to Egypt.
We have to unpack the relational density of that demand. Benjamin is not just another brother, he is Rachel's only other son.
And Rachel was the favorite wife?
Yes. Remember, Jacob loved Rachel above all his other wives. After Joseph was presumed dead, Jacob transferred all of his intense, overprotective love onto Benjamin.
He practically smothered the kid.
He really did. Jacob has made this boy an idol. He guards him fiercely due to his unresolved, crushing grief over the loss of Joseph. The demand to bring Benjamin is not random. It is a precise, surgical strike by divine providence.
It hits him right where it hurts the most.
Joseph, acting as the instrument of this providence, is setting up the ultimate test. Will these men, when their own lives and the survival of their families are on the line, once again sacrifice a son of Rachel to save their own skin?
So what does this all mean for us? I could imagine someone listening to this and thinking, this just seems cruel. Is God playing games with their emotions?
It does seem really harsh on the surface.
Yeah, like why put this old man Jacob through the agonizing stress of losing another son? The discussion from our sources makes it clear that this delay and this severity are absolutely necessary. Biblical peace cannot be built on managed ignorance or hidden sin.
No, it cannot.
Families, institutions, and individuals often try to maintain peace by simply refusing to talk about the dark things in the past. We all know families who operate like this. Everyone sits around the Thanksgiving table smiling, passing the potatoes, and making sure nobody mentions the massive scandal from 10 years ago.
That is a brittle, fake peace.
It really is. God demands the surrender of the very thing Jacob is terrified to release. Providence targets our idols. God cornered Jacob and demanded the very thing he thought he could not live without.
It feels cruel in the moment to Jacob and his sons, but it is driven by a merciful design. God is forcing the old wound into the open so it can actually heal. The brothers say to the Egyptian ruler, "We be 12 brethren, one is not, and the youngest is this day with our father." They are forced to speak the language of brotherhood. Brotherhood is the very word that condemns them because they destroyed their brother.
Wow, they have to say the words out loud.
They are first to admit that one is not, while standing right in front of the one they presume is gone. God is unsettling the household in order to save it. He is making old words rise again so that buried sin can be confessed. True reconciliation requires the beloved idol to be placed on the altar.
To fully grasp the immense weight of this family drama, we have to zoom out and look at who this story was originally written for. We move from the historical event itself to the recording of the event centuries later.
Why Moses wrote it down.
Right. Why did Moses write this down? Imagine the scene on the plains of Moab. A new generation of Israelites is camped out, preparing to cross the Jordan River and conquer Canaan.
They are the chosen people.
They have the law, the tabernacle, and the promises. It would be incredibly easy for them to become arrogant, to think they were chosen because they were inherently better or more righteous than the Canaanites they were about to displace.
Oh, absolutely. Moses' intended effect on that original audience was profound. Massive humility. He is systematically dismantling any grounds for national boasting.
He does not hold back.
He does not present their patriarchal ancestors as romantic, flawless heroes. If you are trying to build up the morale of an army, you usually tell them stories about how brave and noble their ancestors were.
Right, you give them a pep talk.
But Moses does the opposite. He presents their founding fathers as treacherous, envious, deceitful men who were saved entirely by electing covenantal grace.
So when the Israelites heard the brothers say, "We are true men," they were supposed to hear the painful hypocrisy in those words.
Yes. Moses is teaching them that their existence as a redeemed nation does not rest on their own moral superiority.
That brings this ancient text directly into your life right now. We are just as capable of corporate pride, of maintaining outward religious forms while hiding secret sins.
We do it all the time.
We can easily sit in our communities, look at the world around us, and think we are somehow superior. We construct these narratives where we are the true men, the honest ones, the reliable ones.
While completely ignoring our own flaws.
Yeah. But this text warns us against the devastating effects of envy, deception, and the belief that our religious identity makes us immune to God's discipline. The Israelites needed to know that the God who sees hidden sins and orchestrates history to purge his people would deal just as severely with them if they engaged in secret rebellion.
That historical reality of guilty men standing before an unrecognized sovereign points directly to the grand redemptive climax of the entire biblical narrative. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the patterns established by Joseph and his brothers find their final realization in the person and work of Jesus Christ.
The typological parallels are amazing here.
We have to trace them. Joseph is a striking type of Christ. Think about the similarities. Joseph was deeply loved by his father, just as Christ is the beloved son of the Father.
Right.
Joseph was hated by his brothers, sold for the price of a slave, and unjustly punished, mirroring Christ's rejection and crucifixion.
And then the exaltation. Joseph is raised from the dark, forgotten dungeon to the highest seat of authority in Egypt, becoming the sole dispenser of the bread of life to a starving world.
Which is such a clear picture of the gospel.
Christ is raised from the grave and exalted to the right hand of God, becoming the Savior of the world. The historical analysis also points to an incredible connection with the prophet Zechariah, chapter 12, verse 10.
Yes.
The brothers are currently standing before the one they pierced, the one they betrayed, but they are completely unable to recognize him. This anticipates the future realization of Israel and their Messiah. They're looking right at their salvation, but their eyes are blinded by their guilt and fear.
The bread motif is also highly significant. The brothers go to Egypt for literal grain because famine threatens physical death. This temporal grain preserves the physical line of Judah, the very line from which Christ will eventually be born.
Wow, so the physical bread saves the lineage for the eternal bread.
Yes. Christ offers himself as the eternal bread of life. He gives not simply grain for bodies, but his own body for the life of the world. The narrative shows us that just as Joseph dealt roughly with his brothers to expose their sin before revealing his grace, God uses the severe demands of the law to strip us of our self-righteousness before granting the mercy of the gospel.
The research reports heavily on how this text acts as a massive critique of the prosperity gospel and seeker-sensitive pragmatism.
I am glad you brought that up because those are terms that get thrown around a lot. We should clarify what that means for the listener.
Good point. Our sources are very critical of these movements. Just to report what they're saying, when we say seeker-sensitive pragmatism, we are talking about a modern religious movement that designs everything around making the attendee comfortable.
Right, it softens the hard edges of theology so no one gets offended.
And the prosperity gospel is the idea that God exists primarily to make you healthy, wealthy, and successful. Both of these movements offer a domesticated deity.
A very safe, manageable God.
Exactly. They present a God who exists to affirm your self-esteem and make your earthly life pleasant. They tell you that you're inherently good and just need a little encouragement.
But our sources point out that this text insists on something entirely different. True reconciliation with God requires absolute brokenness. It requires confession without bargaining.
You cannot negotiate the terms of your salvation.
No, you have to submit entirely to the sovereign's terms. You have to admit you are completely guilty, open the trunk, show the stolen money, and cast yourself entirely upon his mercy.
This raises an interesting question about how you view the trials in your own life. The prosperity gospel would treat the famine as a sign of God's disfavor and the Egyptian abundance as a sign of success.
Which is completely missing the point.
It completely misses the fact that God's saving work often passes directly through distress. God brings these men to a place of terror to save their souls. Christ acts in the same way. He confronts us with the reality of our sin, not to destroy us, but to bring us to the end of ourselves so we will accept his grace.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, we need to summarize the core value of the history and theology we have examined today.
The central message is clear. God's providence is meticulous. It is inescapable. And yes, it is often incredibly painful.
But that pain is driven by a merciful design.
Yeah, God orchestrates the events of our lives, even the harsh and terrifying ones, to expose hidden guilt, shatter our false defenses, and bring about true, lasting reconciliation. He will not allow his people to build their lives on a foundation of lies.
We must leave you with a specific, challenging question based on this text. When you look at your own life, what is your Benjamin?
That is a heavy question.
What is that cherished idol, that hidden secret, or that area of control that you are fiercely holding on to? What is the thing you are absolutely terrified to release, convinced that surrendering it to the Lord will ruin you? The reality taught by this text is that surrendering your Benjamin is the only true path to your freedom.
Think back to that buried landmine we talked about at the beginning. You can let the grass grow over it for decades. You can try to convince yourself the field is safe. You can build your whole life around avoiding that one patch of dirt.
But that is not really living.
No. True safety does not come from ignoring the explosive beneath the surface. It comes from allowing the expert to dig it up, expose it to the light, and disarm it completely. Do not wait for the pressure to shatter your world. Bring the hidden things into the light of God's grace today. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. Keep seeking truth, keep examining the scriptures, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.